that breaks the constant night. You're the brilliance, the dream, the evidence of things unseen. Even the darkest days are temporary. You're the everlasting light. All of the time and space could not contain you. You're the everlasting light. You're the glory that stays. You never dim, you never fade. You are the power, the truth, and nothing can stop you, and nothing can stop you. Even the darkest days are temporary. You're the everlasting light. All of the time and space could not contain you. You're the everlasting light. Even the darkest days are temporary. You're the everlasting light. All of the time and space could not contain you. You're the everlasting The end and the beginning, a new reality. Outside my understanding, is still within my reach. As far as I can see you, you're closer still to me. You're the everlasting light. The end and the beginning, the new reality. Outside my understanding, is still within my reach. As far as I can see you, you're closer still to me. You're the everlasting light. The end and the beginning, the new reality. Outside my understanding, is still within my reach. As far as I can see you, you're closer still to me. You're the everlasting light. Even the darkest days are temporary. You're the everlasting light. All of the time and space could not contain you. You're the everlasting light. Even the darkest days are temporary. You're the everlasting light. All of the time and space could not contain you. You're the everlasting everlasting light.
Dulles Church family, hey, welcome. Happy Sunday morning. Happy Halloween. And to everyone who's watching, who's new, you've maybe joined us here in recent weeks. And I know of people who've been watching in for the first time here in just the last couple of weeks, or maybe you're new today. On behalf of our staff team, on behalf of our directional leaders, and all of our core leaders, we just want to welcome you to Dulles. Thank you for taking the time to be a part of our morning with us here. Okay, I'm hosting today, and I've got a couple quick things to update you on. First of all, the film festival, the Washington West Film Festival, was last week. It went great. I'm going to save a lot of specific updates for you in the weeks to come. You know, we were expecting energy to be low because of COVID, and we weren't even sure if we should do the film festival back in August. We were still questioning that. It actually turned out great. Numbers were lower this year. We expected that, but the energy was great. And again, we give all of our box office, all of it, 100% of ticket sales away to organizations that we believe in that are really committed to supporting at-risk children. Again, I'll share more details about that with you in the weeks to come. Thank you so much to those of you who volunteer, who buy movie tickets. So many of you are a part of this every year with us. And so I can't wait to celebrate more of the details with you in the weeks to come. All right, also, last month, many of us, I want to say all of us, participated in some way in supporting refugee children that were landing here at Dulles from Afghanistan. And we were specifically partnered with the Dulles South Neighborhood Closet. Well, we have another opportunity coming up starting today for the next couple weeks to collect jackets, lightly worn or new jackets or coats, for their collection and distribution day on November 13th. Now, we're not waiting till the 13th. We don't have to actually be there on the 13th. Starting today, over the next couple weeks, we can go to our website or our Dulles Church mobile app. By the way, if you've not downloaded our Dulles Church app, search for this, download it on your phone. It has a lot of key details from week to week about things happening in and around Dulles Church. You can go to our app, you can go to our website and find out the 2 distribution locations here in the Dulles South Aldi area for lightly worn jackets or coats. Now listen to this. In the first week alone, 195 students in the Lightridge, Freedom, Independence, and Champ High School region had requested help with jackets or coats for the coming winter. That number is expected to double. It's expected to be close to 400 students who make requests on behalf of their families in our area for help with coats and jackets. We want to be a part of this. You can actually go to our Dulles app or the website and register for specific jacket or coat sizes, actually, made by specific students. Or you can just make a donation. The 2 drop-off locations, again, are on our Dulles Church mobile app. All right, finally, next week I kick off a new series. And listen, if you feel like you need something to kind of reboot you spiritually or in your connection with God, if it's been a hectic fall, or maybe you haven't really felt like you've restarted since summer, and summer can be super busy for us, this series is the time to do it. It's the time to lean in. If you haven't been back to church yet since the pandemic, numbers are super low now. We're getting great news all in the area. This is the time. I think this is the time for most to join us in person at Lightridge. Of course, we'll always be online as well, but I'm kicking off a series on Erwin McManus's book, The Genius of Jesus. It is by far the best book I've read all year. I believe it is going to be an iconic book, not just in churches, but in culture. He specifically speaks in this book to people who have questions about faith or God or have some level of cynicism or skepticism. This is about drawing out the best in each of us as we look at what was actually the genius and elements of the genius of Jesus. So I can't wait for this series. I kick it off next Sunday. Think about a friend, maybe somebody that you know struggles spiritually, or they have trouble believing that Jesus actually came back to life. We know what that struggle is like here. We really appreciate that struggle, and we lean into people who have questions about faith or the reality of God, because so many of us have and did, and that's a part of our story. So this series, I believe, is going to be really powerful for all of us, for me, for you, as we lean in and move into and experience, I really believe, more of the reality of God than ever. All right, and again, that kicks off next Sunday. All right, everybody, happy Halloween. I've been super excited for a month or more about Andrew's message today. I think you're going to like it as much as I have, and I really believe Andrew's heard from God. When he told me on the phone one day, this is what I really believe is stirring in my gut. I just knew it was God's heart for us. So lean into this message. I can't wait to be with you again next Sunday. I love you guys very much.
Hey Dulles family, my name is Andrew. I am the student pastor here, and I'm super excited to be with you here today. So about a week, maybe a week and a half ago, my wife Jessie and I, we got back from a vacation in Canada. We were visiting her family. And while we were there, we went to church. It was Sunday, so we went to church. And the church is kind of this traditional, kind of old-fashioned Baptist church. The pastor was wearing a suit and tie, and he was preaching from a pulpit, and there was this big table with a huge Bible. That may bring back memories for some of you. It does for me. That's the kind of church I grew up in. But his message was on John chapter 17, which you can read it for yourself, but it's this long and beautiful prayer that Jesus is praying to the Father, asking for unity among the disciples, among his followers, his believers. And so the pastor is going through verse by verse, explaining it and connecting the modern day church, modern day believers to this prayer that we would be unified. And somewhere, I think it's verse 9, it comes to this part where Jesus says, I am praying for them. I am not praying for the world. The pastor then says, so you see, there's a distinction between us and them. And in my mind, red flags and alarm bells just started going off. I was thinking to myself, oh my goodness, this guy is about to take Jesus' prayer for unity and make it into how it's us against them, how it's believers against the world, how it's light against darkness, good against evil, how we need to be calling out their sin and calling them to repentance and things like that. And so I'm mentally rolling my eyes and I start to check out. Start to zone out of the message. He continues on, and he's talking through the verses and stuff like that, and the distinction between believers and the world. But then he finishes his point, and he lands the point, and he says this: but this does not give us permission to wish harm on or to treat the world any differently than we would each other. And so in that moment, I felt or heard God saying, yeah, Andrew, you were saying. Have you done that before? Have you ever assumed something about someone, thought of someone a certain way based on one thing that they said or one thing that they did? I know you probably have, and I have too, and we do it all the time, and it actually happens more often than we think. If you look at the division that humanity has experienced throughout time, it has mainly been because of how a person or a group of people think about another group of people or another person. And so that's what I want to talk to you about today. I want to talk to you about that division. So I want to talk about also something that God has been working on in my heart. Personally, he's been working on this in my life, and I believe that it is relevant to today's society and today's culture. So everywhere you look, if you watch the news, if you still read newspapers or magazines, if you look at social media, if you watch vlogs, if you listen to podcasts, there's always someone new that we should be canceling. There's always a new political target that we need to be aiming at. There's always a group of people who are now protesting something. There's always a leader who we need to call out their flaws and we need to address them and go against them. We live in such a divided world. And I believe that that contributing factor, or a large contributing factor to this division, is based on how we treat other people. And we talk about that a lot, right? How we should treat other people. We should treat each other well. But another large contributing factor, and I would maybe even say a bigger contributing factor to this division, is rooted in how we think about other people. So the question I want you to chew on for the next few minutes is this: what would it look like if the way you thought about others was based on who they are. Not on their actions, not on their words, not on their beliefs, not on their political stances, but who they are. So what does who they are mean? In the last few weeks, I've been captivated and really intrigued by Jesus' last sayings while he was on the cross. Okay, so he's actually on the cross. Jesus says a handful of phrases or sayings, and there's 7 of them in total, but I want to focus in on one because I really think it captures Jesus' heart on how we should think about others, and it models how we should think about other people. So before I tell you what that saying is, let me give you a little bit of context so you can understand what Jesus was going through, what happened to Jesus, before we look at what he says and how he thinks about people. So there are 4 different narratives, 4 different accounts of the life of Jesus. We call those the Gospels, and they are written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And those are the authors, but they're also the names of the Gospels. And if you flip to the back of each Gospel, maybe in the last 2 to 3 chapters, you're going to find where Jesus is being crucified. You're going to find that storyline of what happens. But if you look at the chapters before that, you're going to see what happened to Jesus before his crucifixion, directly before, probably hours before. And each of the gospel writers, they have similarities in what they write, but they also have some differences. So one of the gospel writers writes about and focuses on how they were mocking Jesus as the King of the Jews. They put a purple robe on him, and they crafted a thorny crown, and they pressed it into his skull. And another writer talks about how Jesus was repeatedly beaten on the head with a stick. One of the gospel writers even talks about how while Jesus was being beaten, the soldiers who were beating him tied a blindfold around his eyes, mocking his divinity, saying, "Hey, if you really are God, tell us who's hitting you right now," as they beat him. And so this is all happening before Jesus is even found guilty or charged with anything. He's just in custody right now. He hasn't even gone through trial. So Jesus is experiencing probably worse treatment than condemned criminals did at this point. So then he goes to what we would know as trial. The religious leaders are accusing Jesus basically of insurrection, of rebelling against the current government, saying things, proclaiming things that would push against the government of that time and of that area. So he's brought to the governor of this area, and his name is Pilate. Now, Pilate questions Jesus, and he listens to him, and you can read the dialogue there. But what ends up happening after Jesus has answered Pilate and talked to him, Pilate says, "I can't find really anything wrong that he's done." And he says to the religious leaders and the people accusing him, "Hey, if you think that he's done something wrong, you punish him and then let him go. I don't want to have anything to do with this." And so he tells the crowd who's waiting to hear the verdict, he tells the soldiers, he tells the religious leaders, "I cannot find anything guilty with Jesus. He has not done anything wrong that I can tell." And the crowd, everyone, responds and demands for Jesus' crucifixion, which was back then the worst punishment that you could receive. Pilate does this 3 times. 3 times he says, "I can't find Jesus guilty of anything. I can't find anything that he's wrong." And all 3 times, the crowd demands for Jesus to be crucified. So Jesus, an innocent man, is condemned. After he's been beaten, after he's basically almost half dead, he's forced to carry this heavy, large cross that he would be crucified on up the hill to where he would be crucified. So he's nailed to the cross and he's hoisted up, and all the while, onlookers and soldiers are still jeering at him. They're still mocking him. They're still spitting on him. They're still throwing things at him. He has a plaque above his head on the cross saying, "All hail the King of the Jews." So Jesus, now on the cross, and this is where we see the saying. This is the saying that I was talking about. It's in Luke chapter 23, verse 34. Jesus says this, as he hangs on for life He says, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Now, I don't know about you, but I can't see anything that the onlookers, that the soldiers, that the religious leaders have done to deserve a response like this from Jesus. Jesus could have said, "You foolish people, you know not what you do," and we wouldn't have batted an eye. Jesus could have said, "You wicked and evil people, you know not what you do," and we would have probably agreed, and we've been like, yeah, they are. So why is Jesus able to respond like this? The better question is, how is Jesus able to respond like this? And it's because Jesus wasn't thinking of them as his accusers. As he hung on the cross and he said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do," he was not thinking of them as the people who had just beat them. He was not thinking of them as the people who were mocking him. He was not thinking about them as his murderers. He was thinking about them as image bearers of God, for who they were. Remember, that's what we're trying to find, who they are. Now that phrase, image of God, it's kind of churchy, right? So let me tell you up front that the image, that phrase, that wording, that language, the image of God, is not something that Christians made up or that the church made up so that we could feel closer to God, or so that we could have some sense of superiority, or so that we could identify with God better. That language, image of God, actually comes from God himself. If you go back to the very first chapter of the very first book in Genesis, chapter 1 and verse 27, you're going to see how where God creates humans, he creates man and woman. And it doesn't just say God created man and woman, go and live your life. It says God created man and woman in his image. So what does that mean for us? Okay, I want to tell you a story. There's this guy, his name is Josh, and Josh finds a group of friends in college, and they become friends because they have similar classes. And so they all hang out together. They hang out in between classes. They hang out after classes. They start hanging out outside of school. Some of them even start dorming together. Now, their schedules always didn't work out, so sometimes it was maybe only 4 of them or 3 of them. But in this case, Josh actually finds himself with one other person. So he's talking to his friend, and they get into this really good conversation, deep conversation. And Josh finds out that his friend is pro-choice. Josh is pro-life. Now the group, they continue growing with each other and talking and sharing and being transparent. And Josh actually comes to find out that half the group is pro-choice and half the group is pro-life. Now that summer, Josh's young adult group at their church, they're going on a retreat. So the pastor encourages everyone to invite their friends. And Josh immediately thinks of his college group, his college friends, and he starts composing a text message to send out an invite to all of them. And as he's doing it, he thinks to himself, this is a church retreat. We're going to be talking about God and Christianity, and my pro-choice friends probably won't want to come to something like this. They probably wouldn't, want to be there. So he deletes the names of his pro-choice friends. His pro-life friends and him go on the retreat, and they have a great time. They come back from the retreat, and the whole group decides that they're going to go to dinner with each other. So they all go to dinner, and they're all talking and stuff like that, and the subject of retreats come up. And Josh and his pro-life friends start talking about how great retreats are, how invigorating they are, how much they grow you, how good they are for your heart and your soul, and how deep conversations are had, and how strong relationships are made. And all of his pro-choice friends are sitting there intently listening and excited even. And one of the pro-choice friends says, "Wow, this sounds exactly like something that I would want to go to. This sounds like something that I need. I've been longing for a strong community. I've been longing for strong relationships. I've been longing for deep conversations in my life. And I think we should all go together. I think we should all go together. When is it, Josh?" And Josh, taken aback, goes, I didn't think that you would want to go." Now, that story, I made it up. It's fictional, and it's probably kind of cheesy. But I think that it portrays the power of how we think of others. You see, like I said in the beginning, we talk a lot about how we treat others, how we should treat each other well, treat other people well. But we cannot treat other people as Jesus would treat them until we think about them how Jesus does. So like I said, that story about Josh was made up, and there's no big deal. If that happened in real life, it wouldn't be like this huge, groundbreaking, probably relationship-breaking thing. There wasn't any hurt. Nobody was violent. Nobody was being, abused. But I know that some of you who are listening right now have very real stories about traumatic hurt and pain that you've gone through because of someone else's actions. And when I said that, you may now even be picturing that person in your head. What about those people? Well, should we think about them how Jesus does? Being able to think about that person as Jesus does is a process. But going through that process does not mean that you're passive or apathetic about their actions. You probably will need to set up boundaries. You will need to set up safeguards, and you may even need to change the dynamic of the relationship. And going through that process of being able to think about that person as Jesus does doesn't mean that you just forget everything and you just erase everything and you move on, or you go forward, or you continue to tolerate those hurts and those wrongs. But in order to start that process, in order to step into that process of being able to think about that person how Jesus thinks about them, in order to get there, you have to start to let go of the desire to define people by their actions. You have to let go of the desire to think about that person solely based on their actions. And you may be thinking, yeah, but Andrew, you don't understand. You don't know what I've gone through. You don't know the pain that I've suffered. You don't know what they've done to me. And you're right. I may not. And there's a chance I may never. But Jesus does. Jesus understands. Jesus understands betrayal. He understands what it's like to have those closest to him turn his back on him. Jesus understands what it's like to be lied to. Jesus understands what it's like to be the target of discrimination and of hate. He understands injustice, and he understands your pain and your suffering. So when you think about that person and what they did, you can acknowledge it. You should. It happened. Yes, they hurt you. Yes, they offended you. Yes, they betrayed you. Yes, they wronged you. Jesus even acknowledged what people did to him. He wouldn't have been able to say, Father, forgive them, if he didn't acknowledge the fact that he was being wronged. But the truth and the reality of someone else's actions does not give you or I the right to define them by it. And not defining them by their actions, not thinking of them based on their actions, does not minimize the gravity of their wrongdoings. It doesn't make it any less. It doesn't mean that it's not as bad. Not defining a person by their actions, not thinking of them based on their actions, does not minimize your pain. It doesn't mean that you should just get over it. But when you choose not to define or not to think of someone based on their actions, you begin to make space for Jesus. And it's in that space that Jesus will begin to show you how he thinks about them and how he defines them, which is as an image bearer of God. So whether you've been hurt, extremely wronged, or if you haven't, friends, let me tell you that we, almost every single day, are given the opportunity to choose how we are going to think about other people. People who we know, your neighbor across the street when he waves at you, your coworker, your friends at school. You are given a daily choice to choose how you are going to think about them, choose how you are going to define them. But I want to challenge you to this, that in those interactions, that you would begin to ask Jesus to show you how he defines them, that you would begin to ask Jesus to show you how he thinks of them. And the story of Jesus on the cross is a perfect example. He was unjustly wronged. People who didn't even know him. But I can tell you this, that when Jesus was on the cross, this is the perfect example. When Jesus was on the cross, he didn't have a political, a cultural, a racial, or a circumstantial view or thought process of others. He wasn't thinking about who was right or wrong. He was thinking about them, everyone past, present, and future, for exactly who they are. For exactly who they are as image bearers of God. And so if we choose to do that, if we choose to start allowing Jesus to work on us, to define others, to show us how to think about other people, I truly believe that our friendships, our families, our schools, our places of work, our communities, and our world is going to experience the love, grace, peace, and harmony of Jesus like never before. Father, I pray that you would give us soft hearts to be able to make space for you, to allow you to define people for us, to allow you to show us what you think of other people. Give us the strength to not immediately want to define someone by their actions or their words. Give us the peace to know that you suffered the greatest injustice. You suffered the greatest wrongs. And yet you still chose to think of and to define those who wronged you for who they really are. Help us to see everyone that we come in contact with as image bearers of God. Amen. Church, I love you guys, and I'm excited to walk in this with you. Let's together start to create this cultural shift to think about others as they truly are. Image bearers of God. I hope you guys have a great rest of your week.